So now that we have our local server running, let's try making some changes to the existing files and see how it affects this page right here. Back in my terminal, I'm inside the Redux Simple Starter folder, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my code editor. Make sure that your server is still running. You can start the server by running npm start from the command line inside of the project directory. Okay, so here I have my code editor open, and it opens right on into the file index.html. You'll notice that we've got just very simple DOM here. We've got a head tag, body tag, which has a single div, and then a script tag for bundle.js. This bundle.js file is the compiled JavaScript for our entire application. So this existing repository right here has a bunch of existing JS files inside of it that you can see. Webpack and Babel take all these files, put them all together into a single file, and makes them available as bundle.js. Whenever we visit the web server at localhost 8080, this is the index or the HTML file that we're actually running. So if I were to add, say, another div in here, or not even just a div, but just some random content, flip back over to Chrome, refresh the page, and you'll see I get random content appearing on the page. I'm going to go ahead, delete the index or delete that extra content, and save the file again. So there's a bunch of existing files in here. Let's open up the folder components inside the source directory and the file app.js. Inside of here, you'll see some existing code with something that says React Simple Starter. Just to show what happens when we change some code in here, I'm going to go ahead and just delete this, and we'll change it to hello there. And then I'm going to tab back over, refresh the page, and you'll see we have hello there. So again, this development server that we have running, this boilerplate package, takes all these JavaScript files that we have, bundles them up together, and ships it off to the browser. Whenever we make a change to some content in a file, we can just save it, refresh the page in the browser, and we'll see the new content pop up on the screen. Cool. Okay, so we've got this existing source file in here, this source folder, with a bunch of existing JavaScript. Now, it's kind of a policy of mine to avoid starting off with as much sample code or boilerplate code as possible. So I don't really want to start with all this boilerplate that we have in here. We've got some directories where, who knows what actions or reducers or even index.js are. So rather than start with some of this code that was given to us from this boilerplate package, I want to go ahead and we're going to start from scratch. So I'm going to select the source folder and delete it entirely. Then we're going to go ahead and make a new folder, and we'll call it source, and then make a new file and call it index.js. So we're basically just starting totally from scratch here with a blank index.js file. Back over in Chrome, I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll see we have no content up on the screen anymore. I'm also going to pop open my console here on the side, and you can see that we don't have any errors or anything like that, so totally clean slate here. All we have is this boilerplate package that's going to take any of the code that we write in here, mush it all together in a single file, and serve it off to the browser. Okay, so without any further ado, let's talk about it, or the real answer here. What is React? What's React doing for us? How are we going to use it to make any type of application? React is a JavaScript library that is used to produce HTML that is shown to a user in a web browser. So when we write React code, we're writing individual components or views. Components, and I'm going to use the term components and views kind of interchangeably here, are snippets of code that produce HTML. So whenever you think component or view, think something that produces HTML. When we write React code, we write multiple different components. And we nest these components together by placing one inside the other in different fashions to make really complex applications relatively simple. A component is a collection of JavaScript functions that produce HTML. So when we're making a component, we're writing JavaScript, but it's going to ultimately produce HTML. Okay, so enough about what components are. Let's try actually writing one. So in my code editor here, I've got index.js open, and we're going to start through this process here of writing the first component. For learning something from scratch, I'm a big fan of kind of writing out comments or saying what we want to have happen before we start writing any code. So I'm going to put 2 comments in here that just kind of vaguely describe what we're going to try to accomplish inside this file here. I'm going to say, we want to create a new component, and this component should produce some HTML. So, that makes sense. We're making a React component. We want it to produce some HTML. After we create that component, we need to actually make sure that it gets put into the DOM somehow. We're going to write many different components, but none of them actually automatically get inserted into our HTML document. We have to specifically say, React, please take this component that I just made, and shove it into the DOM. I want a user to be able to see the thing. So we'll say, take this component's HTML, we'll say generated HTML, and put it on the page, which means really in the DOM, right? So it's kind of a 2-step process that we have here for this first component. We're first going to make the component, and then we're going to show it on the page somehow. Okay, so as we go through this process, I'm going to kind of do it in a naive fashion. All right, I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to write some code, and it's not going to work at first, okay? And I know that is kind of frustrating sometimes when you watch a lecture and the person says, okay, oh, we're doing it the wrong way. But the purpose here, the goal, is throughout this entire course, I want you to get really familiar with troubleshooting. So I want you to not always see the perfect working, all the code comes together perfectly, no errors whatsoever. I want you to see some of the errors that we get, and I want you to get used to them and be able to interpret them and be able to troubleshoot those errors. So as we go through this first component, we're going to make some mistakes, or we're going to make them on purpose, but we're going to talk about the errors that we get, and we're going to talk about what they mean. So when you see red text popping up in our console, something that says oops, you just messed something up, excuse me, I don't want you to think, oh, red text, something's wrong, whatever. I want you to think, oh, red text, this is a problem, something we need to, an error that we need to look at, understand, and try to troubleshoot. Okay, so let's get started with our first component here. And we're going to just put some code on the screen, and we'll talk about exactly what's happening. So I'm going to write const app is a function, and then return div hi, like so. Okay, so if you're familiar with JavaScript, and I sure hope you are, some of this is going to look familiar, and some of it's probably going to look pretty weird. I assure you that it's all JavaScript, even though you do see what looks like some HTML in here. So let's start from the very beginning. The first weird thing, const. Const is an ES6 or ES 2016 piece of syntax. So as we go through this first section here, as we start to put our first application together, you're going to see a lot of simultaneously React concepts, but also ES6 concepts at the same time. And I'm going to try to do my best to point out which one is, this is specifically something that's ES6, and this is specifically something that's React. So const. You might be used to declaring variables by using the keyword var, so something that looks more like, var app. Const really is doing somewhat of the same thing. It's declaring a variable. The only difference here is that whenever we declare a variable with const, we're saying this is the final value of this variable. It's not going to change. We shouldn't even really call it a variable. We should really call it a constant. It's a constant. It's never going to change. In other words, we're never going to reassign app down the line. So you're never going to see something that says app equals 5. This would throw an error right here. Okay, next, a function. Hopefully you're familiar with functions, nothing too crazy here. We're just declaring a constant called app and assigning it a function. What's going on inside the function, however, is probably, something a little bit new, right? We have some what looks like HTML inside of our function here. But as we know, we can't write HTML inside of our JavaScript, so what's going on? Well, this HTML looking stuff right here is what we refer to as JSX. JSX is a subset or dialect of JavaScript that allows us to write what looks like HTML inside of our JavaScript, but is really behind the scenes just JavaScript. So this is coming back to the concept that we spoke about earlier, where Webpack and Babel is going to do some level of transpiling of our code before it gets ran in the browser. So when this code shows up in our browser, it doesn't actually look like div, hi, div. It looks totally different, and we'll talk a little bit about what it really looks like in a little bit here. Excuse me. Okay. So with this on the screen right now, this looks pretty good. We've got a component here. It returns some JSX, and we'll talk about exactly what JSX is doing here. But it looks like, hey, this might be legitimate. This might be something we can do. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to flip over to the browser. We're going to refresh, and nothing. Excuse me. Well, of course there's nothing. We haven't done step 2 here yet. We haven't taken the component yet and put it into the page. So let's continue in the next section and do this second step.